Hello, my friends. If you've been in the Amberverse for very long, you've probably heard the sort of meme when Amber finds a new girlfriend to say it's a caretaker. If she's acting a little suspicious, like she might be talking to somebody behind the scenes, we say, oh, she's found a new caretaker. And if you're new to Girl World, you might think that's kind of mean and it's sort of fatphobic or whatever. But there's actually a pretty good reason for calling them caretakers. And that is because in the past, Amber has actually had caretakers in the form of her significant others, at least one for sure that we know of, and that is Beck. Now, even Amber has admitted that Beck was her caretaker for a while.
Wiping for me has always been extremely hard as a bigger girl, obviously. If you were bigger, my size, it's hard. When I was about to get my hysterectomy, that was a big thing for me that I was like, how am I going to be able to wipe myself? Because it's hard already. I'm not going to be able to. So this is something that I was like, at the time, I was like, Becky, like, are you going to be able to do this for me? Like, I'm really embarrassed about it. And they were like, of course. Like, I love you, blah, blah, blah. So when I was healing, I physically could not do it. Like, physically could not do it. And so Beck did it for me. And so did my mom. Me and my mom would laugh about it though, because it was just like, okay, you did this for me as a baby, and now you're doing it for me as an adult. So it was an embarrassing type deal. But so me not being able to wipe for it was like honestly a few weeks. And already something that was already so hard for me, I kind of lost the ability to do it. I was literally shook. Because I remember when I was noticing like my healing was getting better, like everything was going great, like I was able to do all sorts of things again and all this stuff, and like the healing was just going perfect. And I was like, holy fuck, wait a minute. I like have lost the ability to like do this. And obviously after time I was able to figure that out again, thankfully. But I would say Beck wiped me for I would say a good 9 months. And it's really embarrassing, and I know a lot of people are going to forever make this a meme, and that's okay.
And I would imagine that Jade probably was too, but we didn't really hear much from Jade. But Beck themselves have actually said, yes, I was Amber's full-time caretaker.
After quitting my job and slowly becoming her full-time caretaker, I had no money of my own going into the account, but nothing was spent without her knowing about it or being the one to spend it herself.
Now, the problem with that is Beck was not compensated for that. In fact, the way Beck tells the story, and in my opinion, Beck is far more trustworthy than Amberlynn. Beck says that they basically didn't get any compensation for anything other than just the general, I live with Amber, and so when we need to buy something, she buys it, that kind of thing. But they were never actually compensated monetarily for the caretaking or their time with Amber on the live streams. And of course, when Amber made probably the most money she has made in her entire life was when she was live streaming with Beck. But this video isn't about the live streams. This is about what Beck might be owed legally because of their caretaker role when it came to Amberlynn. So somebody sent me this, thank you very much, by the way, and I kind of gave it a little read, and I decided this is probably worth talking about, and they make a good point, which I will get to at the end, as to why it's a good idea to share this. So this video is not only for Beck, but this is also just sort of a message or maybe a PSA for anybody who might end up dating Amber or ends up a caretaker for her, So what we're going to go over today is a little bit of what's called the companionship services under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the Fair Labor Standards Act is the federal statute that mandates minimum wage, overtime compensation, child labor protections for employees both in public and private sectors. So this is the act that really sort of set the groundwork for the way we understand labor today and the way it's compensated. And now I would say it's probably in dire need of a little bit of updating, especially since some people are actually wanting to reverse a lot of this. But at least this is the basis for what we're going to be talking about today. Going forward, the Fair Labor Standards Act, I'm just going to call the FLSA, okay? So in 1974, Congress amended the FLSA to include domestic service employees, defined broadly as those performing household-related tasks in or around a private residence, either temporary or permanent. This includes, but is not limited to, companions, babysitters, cooks, cleaners, personal care aides, home health aides, chauffeurs, and gardeners. Now, it does say that there are some domestic workers that would be exempt from the FLSA. And if they're exempt, that just means that their employer doesn't have to pay them the minimum wage and overtime and things like that. And it includes casual babysitters and those engaged in what they call companionship services, which at first kind of sounds a little dirty, but basically what they're saying is, like, if you are visiting an elderly patient or person or a disabled person and just kind of hanging out with them. It says fellowship involves engaging the individual in social and recreational activities, conversation, reading, games, crafts, accompanying them to appointments and stuff like that. And then it says protection is basically just being there with them, just to keep them company, make sure that nobody, I don't know, breaks in or something. I don't know. Now, while you are performing these companionship services, there may be times where you have to do what they call care tasks, which include activities of daily living, such as toileting, bathing, grooming, feeding, dressing, and mobility. It also says instrumental activities of daily living, such as cooking, housework, etc. But I think Beck's activities would fall more under the ADLs, the toileting, bathing, etc. And as long as that part of it doesn't exceed 20% of the total work week, then it's still exempt. Like, you're still exempt. So if you go hang out with Juanita, and Juanita generally just needs a companion, just somebody to hang out with and talk to, but she has an accident, you have to wipe her or something like that, you would still be exempt from the FLSA because you're not spending at least 20% of your work week doing the activities of daily living. You're mainly doing companionship services. If the care tasks, such as the activities of daily living, if over 20% of your work week includes these, then you are not exempt from the FLSA, meaning your employer, in this case Amber, would be required to pay her caretaker for the time that they spend taking care of her, even if they are her significant other. So this says workers lose exemption if they devote over 20% of their work week to care services or some other things, but that's not, the other two aren't relevant. This is where Beck would have a claim, in my opinion. Now, at first, that sounds like a lot. It sounds like, man, Beck would have to prove that they spent 20% of their week taking care of Amber. But it's not the whole week, it's the work week. So it's basically 20% of 8 hours per day or 40 hours per week. That sounds about right. In fact, it's less than a couple of hours a day. It ends up being about 8 hours a week, would be 20% of 40. Now, Amber has documented their entire relationship, documented all the time that they spent together pretty much. So it probably would not be terribly difficult for Beck to prove that they spent a couple hours a day taking care of Amber.
It did get a little better when we moved into the apartment with the large walk-in shower, but I did still stand in the bathroom and help until the day we broke up.
Amber has admitted that it's happened at least for a certain period of time.
I would say Beck wiped me for, I would say, a good 9 months.
This is some legal commentary from the person that sent me this, and it says, should a former caregiver such as Beck assert that they provided uncompensated companionship and care services in a domestic setting, they may have grounds to pursue remuneration through civil litigation, particularly if the labor rendered satisfies the FLSA's definition of employment, which is a little debatable, but is probably pretty likely. I think it does. And even if it doesn't quite rise to the level of needing to be compensated by Amber, it could rise to the level of being compensated by some programs that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. Key considerations would include whether a verbal or implied contract existed, which they were online talking about it constantly. You know, it was a relationship. So there wasn't really a contract needed. Whether tasks performed exceeded the companionship exemption threshold, which I would say they did. Whether services constituted employment under the federal or state definitions, which Sort of, yeah. I mean, I would say that would be more along the lines of the live streams, but I think the combination of the live streams and the caregiver stuff would be employment, you know.
Becky dumps Amber, but has an entire audacity to still become a paid employee of hers. That's messed up. Well,
if you knew how much I paid her, you wouldn't think it was messed up. I told Becky she has to pay half the bills. And that's that. That's on that. Because we're not together anymore. So I chose to make myself a boss. I'm joking. The only thing she does is live stream. Like, she doesn't do anything else. She just sits on these live streams with me because it helps. I know you guys love her and the vibe and the whatevers. And it helps me. Maybe I'm being selfish. I really don't care.
Will Becky still do the lives when she moves out? No.
Well, can we talk about that off camera? Because I'll still pay you. Don't you want extra? All you do is sit here and talk.
I don't know, man.
We need to sign a contract.
We'll see what
Can
I'm
we
up
get like
to.
real professional with this?
We'll see what I'm up to. Because I know how you'll get too. You'll be like, I don't have items and I need you to go to the store to get them. Amberlynn, it's like 11 o'clock at night and I'm tired. But I'm your boss.
That's a fucking lie.
You know, she would also be like, well, I need you to do things for me. I can't do these things on my own, especially like, you know, going places and shopping and stuff like that.
And of course, Beck said that they never received any compensation for the live streams, let alone for any of the caregiver work that they performed.
Because I didn't get any of the money from the live streams that I participated in. But I am just grateful to be out of that situation and in a better one now.
And then whether any documentation or third-party corroboration exists, which I don't think there's anything like that. It says, in Kentucky, low-income individuals may pursue such claims with the assistance of pro bono legal services, particularly if the matter gains sufficient community interest or media attention. Which I think in this scenario, the community interest or media attention would be us. gorlworld. Moreover, if Amber benefited from caregiver services while documenting the arrangement publicly or attempting to claim the caregiver as a dependent for tax purposes, this could implicate her in tax fraud or misrepresentation depending on the filings and IRS definitions. Now, we don't know if Beck was listed as a dependent. I'm not even sure if Beck knows how Amber filed the taxes. But that would be interesting to find out, you know? So, financial assistance for cancer-affected caregivers, all right? This is specifically for people who are taking care of somebody who has cancer, okay? If Beck's service to Amber occurred concurrently with a diagnosis or treatment of cancer, they may qualify for financial relief under programs including these. And even Amber said specifically that Beck's caregiver role started when she had her hysterectomy. Now, Beck says that they were actually taking care of her before that.
After Amber's cancer scare and hysterectomy, I was the one who took care of her while she was healing. And yes, I was the one who wiped her. But I wiped her plenty before that. I believe from sometime in 2019 to June 2021 when we broke up.
So either way, it was happening. And it was mostly due to the cancer diagnosis. And if somebody sees this, wants to write these down, or if Beck wants to get in touch with me, I can give them this list. The person that sent this to me really did a lot of research, and they clearly know what they're talking about, and they had a lot of thoughts and commentary. So I'm going to read some of their thoughts here because, I mean, this seems like something that could benefit not only Beck, but probably Jade, probably a lot of people who have been in contact with Amber for long periods of time. So concluding commentary. This is actually some commentary from the person that sent this to me, and it's clear that they are pretty passionate about holding Amber accountable, but also helping Beck get compensated or at least get some kind of justice for all the time that Beck spent taking care of Amber and all the crap that went along with that. Pun very much intended. It is evident from Amber's public disclosures, i.e., her extensive library of vlogs cataloging her entire life and their entire relationship, and her interpersonal dynamics during the Beck era, that Beck was functionally acting in a caregiver capacity. Given the apparent extent of their services, possibly 24/7 care, there is a strong basis to argue that Beck was entitled to compensation equivalent to that of a domestic service worker. If this matter were pursued in a court of law, it would raise questions regarding the veracity of testimonies from close acquaintances, for example, Jade, Eric and Ricky, etc. Amber's potential mischaracterization of the caregiver relationship in tax or benefit claims, and the community's willingness to advocate for restitution. And I don't think Beck's going to struggle finding a community willing to advocate for them. This situation illustrates the broader societal neglect of unpaid caregivers, particularly within intimate relationships. Accordingly, legal recognition and equitable compensation should be pursued vigorously, if not for justice, then for precedent. There are a lot of caregivers out there who are maybe manipulated into it, or they're in a relationship where they don't really have much of a choice, and then they don't get compensated. And then if that relationship ends, they have nothing. They have nothing to show for it. Much like Beck, with $100 and a swift kick in the ass saying, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
She gave me $100, and that's what I used to go get the U-Haul with. And I only had one day with that U-Haul because I didn't have enough money to pay for an extra day. And I was trying to rush and pack everything that I could as quickly as possible. And I was running out of time, so I had a little breakdown and was crying about it, saying I didn't know how I was going to pay for extra time with the U-Haul because I didn't have the time to get everything. And she started laughing about it. So she was laughing about the fact that I couldn't afford to continue to have the U-Haul for longer. So no, she obviously didn't feel bad. She didn't care at all. And she did not give me all the money that I needed, or else why would I have been struggling and crying about the fact that I couldn't afford to have the U-Haul longer?
So it would be good to try to help those who should be compensated be compensated. These are all questions that must be considered. And truthfully, I believe with the gravitas of such belief entails that as a community, we possess not only the numbers, but the collective voice and moral compass to bring these issues to the forefront of YouTube discourse. It is not merely about content or drama, but rather about bearing witness to the silent harms endured by those who trusted someone who wielded emotional manipulation as both a shield and a sword. Beck stands out as someone particularly exploited. They deserve acknowledgement, restitution, and the dignity of being seen beyond the lens through which Amber monetized them. Amberlynn Reed, who has publicly admitted to receiving money and possibly inheritance-related funds from Beck following the death of Beck's mother, raises an essential question. Did she lawfully and transparently report this income or benefit to the IRS? And if not, was this omission due to negligence, ignorance, or willful concealment? Now we're getting into the inheritance issue, okay? A forensic examination of inheritance and tax obligations. Taxable income generated from inheritance. If inherited assets generate income, be it via interest-bearing accounts, dividends, rental revenue, or capital gains, that income is indeed taxable. For example, if Amber deposited inherited money into a savings account that accrues interest, that interest must be reported. Failure to do so may result in penalties, interest charges, or even IRS audits. The bottom line is we do know that if Amber received any kind of income from that inheritance money, then she should have reported it. And if she didn't, that's a problem. However, here it gets into the legal and ethical implications of inheritance transfers. In Kentucky, inherited assets are transferable, but such transfers are governed by both statutory and equitable principles. If Amber received inheritance, which I think she had to because that was the only bank account they had. It had to go into Amber's account. And then reallocated, withheld, or redirected that inheritance in contradiction to the decedent's will, Without proper documentation or beneficiary consent, she may have engaged in tortious interference with inheritance rights. And tortious interference is also known as intentional interference with contractual relations. Basically, it just means somebody intentionally interferes with a contract or interferes with the way things are supposed to go contractually. So, in this case, if Amber took that money and put it in her own account and then spent it on bills, she is intentionally interfering with the direction that that money is supposed to go legally. So that is a civil issue and is recognized by courts. Or even fraudulent transfer.
When my mother passed away, me and my siblings received a portion of a settlement from my dad's job that ended up being around $5,000 to $6,000 for each of us. I was not allowed to keep it. She told me that the money had to go into paying the bills and my half of the rent. My mom had plans for when she would have received that money before she passed away. Getting it was bittersweet, and I would have liked to use it in some way to honor her. She wouldn't have wanted Amber to have it, and it really hurt, but she took it anyway. When I told her that I would like to do something with the money, she dismissed it and treated me like I owed it to her, and it wasn't my choice. She said that I couldn't have it because the bills needed to be paid, even though I knew that she was making enough from YouTube to cover bills and rent with no problem.
We don't know if Beck's mom had a will. We don't know any of the actual details of what was supposed to be done with that money. And this is consider the following legal pathways. Consent among beneficiaries. Where multiple parties are named in a will, one cannot simply gift or redirect their portion without potentially triggering conflict. Consent and clear communication are essential to prevent fiduciary breaches. Now, I would be flabbergasted if the will named Amber for any of the inheritance money from Beck's mom. I cannot imagine a world where Beck left any money to Amber specifically. And that's kind of what this is saying. If multiple parties are named in a will, one can't just decide what to do with it, but there's no way Amber was named in the will. Contradiction of intent. If the deceased expressed a clear intention regarding the distribution of their assets, and Amber's subsequent behavior subverted that intent, meaning it's supposed to go to Beck, and then Amber bought makeup with it or something, a probate court may find the transfer invalid or contestable. And then duress and undue influence, which is something that Amber is very good at. If Beck or any other involved party transferred inheritance under emotional coercion, manipulation, or pressure from Amber, that transaction may be void under Kentucky's legal definition of duress. And given the fact that Beck endured financial abuse throughout their entire relationship with Amber, I would say that it would probably fall under duress, considering Amber would hold the money over Beck's head all the time for a couple of reasons. Number one, because Amber had the high-paying job and made sure Beck knew it all the time, that, Beck was not the one making the financial decisions because they didn't have a job. And number two, Amber was constantly in fear of Beck leaving, and anytime Amber would see Beck getting some kind of money, she would stop it. And she would do whatever she could to make sure that Beck didn't have any money because she was afraid that Beck was going to leave her.
Amber constantly held over my head that she was the only one with an income. During almost every argument, she would tell me how she pays all the bills and buys all the food, as if that gave her a right to control me, and as if I contributed nothing to her life. I would tell her each time that if she felt that way, I'd gladly go back to working. She'd quickly say, no, I don't want you to do that. And she didn't. She couldn't handle being apart from me for any extended period of time. She needed a caretaker, and that was already my full-time job, and a thankless one. Despite that, and doing what I could to contribute by also being in the vlogs, when she knew full well that I didn't want to be, in order to earn the home I was living in her mind, she would also be sure to take away any money I'd get from other sources. I mentioned this before, but even being seen collecting change would trigger her to question whether I was saving up to leave her.
And so when that inheritance money came in, and Amber decided to do what Amber wanted to do with it, after all this time of Beck being told that they don't have a say with the finances, I would say that falls under duress and undue influence, because what is Beck going to do? Amber has made it clear that Beck did not have a say when it came to the money, And Beck had already experienced all the financial abuse throughout the entire relationship. So yeah, duress, for sure. So this goes into the gravity of duress, basically just explaining how it's a serious deal when any kind of contract or anything is made when somebody is under duress, it becomes a serious issue. It basically just says, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, duress refers to unlawful pressure or threats that overpower a person's free will, thereby invalidating any agreement or transfer made under such conditions. This includes both emotional manipulation and economic threats that cause someone to act involuntarily. Now, it can be very subtle, as with the situation with Amber and Beck, where Amber had all the power and had manipulated Beck for so long that Beck really just didn't have a choice. And that's also duress. Because again, what is Beck going to do? First of all, Beck didn't have access to the account. So it's not like they could just pull the money out and take it back. And we know Amber would throw a fit, would absolutely go bonkers if Beck actually tried to get that money back or tried to tell Amber that they want that money back. So it says a transfer made under duress can be nullified by the courts. It could be legally reversed, or Beck could be subject to damages. So there is some recourse. And again, all of this would be an uphill battle for Beck. But two things they would have on their side: A, mountains and mountains of evidence because of all the years of vlogs and all the years of live streams and stuff like that, that document everything that happened, basically. But also, they would have a huge community of people finding whatever information they need. You know that if Beck got on here and said, I'm going after the money I'm owed for the inheritance and for all of my time working as Amber's caregiver, there would be an army, a gorlworld army, to help make sure that that happened. Because if nothing else, we would all love to see Amber be held accountable for something, you know? It says, why this matters beyond the tax code. Amber's well-documented refusal to seek professional guidance, whether legal, medical, or financial, only amplifies the concern. This habitual rejection of accountability fosters an environment in which misrepresentation, tax non-compliance, and exploitation can flourish if unchecked. If she did not inherit assets and failed to consult a CPA or estate attorney, that negligence does not absolve her of responsibility, either morally or legally. So basically saying, if Amber got this money that was meant for Beck, got into her account, and she was just like, hey, bunch of free money, I'm going to start spending it, without consulting somebody, that's irresponsible, on the verge of negligence, you know, which, yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. In a just society, we do not excuse ignorance where harm is demonstrable, especially when the power imbalance is stark and the party in question profits monetarily or socially from the suffering of others. And that's pretty much what happened with Amber. Beck was taken advantage of, whether they knew it or not at the time. And I don't even know that Amber really understood what kind of harm she was doing, but it doesn't matter. The harm was done. Community responsibility and collective memory. We, as digital citizens and ethical consumers of content, have an obligation to scrutinize the structures that enable this behavior. Meaning, if we're just going to sit here and watch, especially when we find out after the fact that this person was taken advantage of and was not compensated for all the work that they did, it kind of behooves us to at least look at the structure, look at what's happening, and say, what can we do to help this? What can we do to fix this? This isn't right. If Beck's trauma and financial loss were indeed real, and if inheritance, coercion, and or tax fraud are potentially part of that narrative, then YouTube cannot remain as a silent witness. Amber must answer for her actions, not with rehearsed apologies or non-apologies, but with transparency, remorse, and if applicable, legal compliance, which is the only compliance you're ever going to get out of Amberlynn Reid. Whether through community advocacy, platform accountability, or legal recourse, the burden now lies with us to elevate these concerns above mere spectacle and place them into the realm of ethical inquiry and justice. Beck deserved more than they received. Period. We know that Beck did not receive the proper compensation or compensation at all for the live streams or for being a caregiver for as long as they were. We must ensure that they and anyone else silenced or minimized is not forgotten beneath the weight of Amber's endless monetized monologue. Now, I think this was superbly written and very well spoken. I think a lot of people in Girl World, a lot of the consumers of Girl World content, are here just because of the drama and just because it's hilarious and disturbing and crazy, the spectacle of it all. And there are some that are here because they like to see Amber be taken to task, be held accountable, especially since we know she watches reaction channels. So there's something special about watching reaction channels knowing that Amber is likely watching and hearing what they're saying. But that part of us that likes to know that Amber's being held accountable is also the part of us that wants to see justice served, wants to see Amber be held accountable, not only for just being a narcissist or being an asshole, but also for taking advantage of people like Beck. And probably Jade. I'm going to keep saying that I'm guessing Jade is in this boat too, because I bet Jade did a lot of caregiver work when they were together. So all of this was just sort of to raise awareness and to give Beck an idea that, hey, maybe there is a path to being compensated even now, even after the fact. Now, is any of this going to help? I don't know, but it's probably worth just putting out there, and then Beck can do what they want with it. Or somebody can come along, take the information and run with it and maybe help Beck out, or Jade, or whoever. So anyway, I appreciate you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.